Hello, sisters. Thank you and welcome to this session on the cotton ceiling. I'm going to show you a few slides today, but I want to just start by saying a few points without showing you anything. First, I want to say that I'm extremely grateful to LFT for hosting this important session, and most importantly, in the current climate of renewed and extreme misogyny and anti-lesbianism, as well as the violent threats and attempt at shutting down this event due to its uncompromising pro-lesbian political stance. I'm grateful to LFT for holding strong, and I'm impressed with the organizers' integrity and resilience during what must have been an extremely stressful time. It is unthinkable to me that any lesbian event would go on in this day and age without discussing this particular issue that I'm going to talk about today. And yet most self-proclaimed events never talk about it. And in my opinion, erasing one of the biggest threats that lesbians face today. The silencing surrounding sexual violence is nothing new. Rape victims are always and notoriously silenced. It's always a struggle to have our voices heard when we are victims. When the victim is a lesbian, there may be added difficulty due to the particular oppression faced by lesbians. Systematic lesbian erasure means that lesbians' oppression remain itself largely invisible. And if we cannot see lesbian in society, our struggle are bound to remain unseen also. So the patriarchal myth that lesbians are just like men, quote, means that lesbians are often portrayed as being sexually predatory and perpetrators themselves in the same way that men are, but also that lesbians do not themselves face sexual violence. And as I will prove today, this is not the case. So in this it's urgent that the sexual violence faced by lesbians in the LGBT community particularly is spoken about and uncovered and fought. Talking about difficult topic and fighting against the silencing is what feminists have always done. There is no amount of name calling or threats that would stop me doing this. I wanted to make a point on language. It's remarks I always make when I speak about transgenderism and its impact on women and lesbians. So to enable clear political analysis, based on sex, not gender, based on material reality, not ideology, and as a feminist statement of resistance, I reject the use of patriarchal queerified language that dictates that we should respect preferred pronouns when these pronouns contradict a person's biological sex. I do not use preferred pronouns. I only use pronouns to refer to someone's biological sex, and therefore I will always in this workshop refer to males as men, even when they identify otherwise. The reason I do this is because the enforcement of preferred pronoun is a form of compelled speech, which aim to make us comply with patriarchal propaganda. The enforcement of preferred pronoun is a form of gaslighting. They make us deny the biological reality we all know exists. Gaslighting is a form of emotional abuse. It's a form of thought control. And as I will show later, this is not fear-mongering, but this is a strategy used purposely by perpetrators. So the topic of this talk is the cotton ceiling. And to understand the cotton ceiling, we must look at the meaning of the word lesbian. And to do this, I must take you back in time in a linguistic and ideological journey. In Gender Trouble in 1990, Judith Butler decided that the category woman had become irrelevant politically. She believed that because there are so many variables to the category women, such as race, class, or ethnicity, it would appear that no one knows what a woman is anymore. Butler believes that woman is a fabricated construct, not a reality, not a material reality. And this is where the shift from sex to gender come from. So the queer shift has consequences for lesbians, because if we cannot define what a woman is, then we cannot define what lesbianism is either. So once upon a time, a long time ago, a lesbian was a female who was sexually and emotionally attracted to other females. Now, because the material reality has been judged irrelevant and gender central, a lesbian is a person who identifies as a woman who is sexually attracted to another person who also identifies as a woman. And as a person who identifies as a woman can be both of the male of the female sex, the term lesbian has lost all meaning. And the concrete significance of that theory for lesbian is the cotton ceiling. So what is the cotton ceiling? The term cotton ceiling is based on the feminist concept of the glass ceiling. It was coined by feminists to describe the barrier faced by female workers who struggle to attain positions of power in the workplace because these positions are kept by men and the power that goes with it. The term cotton ceiling is referring to the underwear of the lesbian who refuses sexual contact with men who identify as lesbians. So lesbians who only have sex with females are told that we gatekeep womanhood, as only a sexual experience with a lesbian could validate a male who identifies as trans and make him magically a real lesbian. So I want next to give you a short historical slideshow so we can go a little bit more in detail with images about what it means with some visuals. So in 2012, almost 10 years ago, Drew DeVoe, a male who identifies as trans and a porn performer, is credited to have used the term cotton ceiling for the first time to describe the so-called difficulties faced by men who identify as trans to be accepted in the lesbian community, and most particularly when it comes to finding lesbian sexual partners. Indeed, DeVoe found that lesbians were reluctant to have sex with men who identify as trans. The very same year, Morgan Page, who is another male who also called himself a woman, ran a workshop in a Planned Parenthood event in Toronto. And the workshop was called Overcoming the Cotton Ceiling, and it aimed to, and I quote, explore the sexual barrier queer trans women face and strategize way to overcome them. So note this workshop, it's written at the bottom, is absolutely not inclusive. It was exclusively open to males of various gender identities. And I think we can all agree this is an obvious double standard because lesbians are constantly pressured to be inclusive to everyone, as we've experienced with this event. Lesbian sexuality in this workshop is framed as a barrier to be overcome by men who identify as trans. So another early and notorious example of the cotton ceiling dates from 2014. The male porn performer Chelsea Poe, who identifies as trans, publicly hounded the lesbian porn actress Lily Cade online when she refused to cast him in one of her lesbian porn production. And here you can see on the screenshots the very direct sexual pressure put on Cade. Have you ever had sex with trans women for a dyke sex scene, he asked her. And then again, never sucking dick is seen as degendering trans dyke. And a lesbian placing sexual boundaries is presented as a form of oppression against trans women. Lesbians are framed as oppressing men when we are not sleeping with them. And if you think about it, this is very similar to the rhetoric used by incels. The only difference is how each category of male identifiers. And of course, right at the bottom of the page, you can see the gaslighting going further. Trans women have female bodies too, he says. And the meaning of this sentence is penises are female organs. So lesbians are expected to accept a male person's genital as these genital magically become female organs if the male identifies as a woman. Penises, when they are attached to men who identify as trans, are now renamed girl dick, girl cock, lady's stick, lady's penis. As some lesbians use dildos or strap-on as part of their sexual practice, the term built-in strap-on or strapless to refer to the penis has also been used to highlight the supposed similarities between the real male organ and the plastic replica, and the lack of consistency from lesbians in accepting one while rejecting the other. So the following screenshots here all come from Twitter and YouTube. And they come from males who identify as trans and have famously named sexual preferences as inherently transphobic. And I give you a screenshot of Sophia Banks in 2014, Rachel McKinnon, who's now called Ivy in 2016, and then Riley in 17. And I wanted to take a bit of time to break down McKinnon's screenshot. He is here in a discussion with an account called Echo Death March, and it describes a scenario that we will see later is not so fictional. So I quote, "A lesbian falls in love with a trans woman, but the cis lesbian falters," she changed her mind, "at the last minute because wrong genital, he has a penis. Everyone cries." So let's break down that scenario. Imagine a lesbian who is dating a male who identifies as trans, who for some reason has not declared his trans status or his male genitalia. Imagine the lesbian doesn't know. Imagine the lesbian's reaction as she realizes at the last minute that she is not in fact about to have a sexual relationship with a female, but with a male. Imagine the feeling of shock at the thought of having been tricked, the fear of being in a very vulnerable situation she knows she may not be able to escape, the fear of rape. The male plays the trick on her, yet it's the lesbian who is presented as inconsistent and irrational for changing her mind. So apparently, changing her mind is not acceptable. And changing her mind upon seeing a penis is seen as overreaction. She needs to get over it. The presence of a penis is not seen as a good reason for a lesbian to opt out of sex. So all notions of consent are ignored here. She is seen as somehow owing sex to the male no matter what, or she will be seen as transphobic and bigoted, and it will all be her fault. But McKinnon carries on. The cis lesbian gets over her genital hang-ups and realizes that she can cope just fine. So lesbians are expected to cope. Lesbianism is seen as an emotional problem, an inhibition to be overcome. So lesbians are expecting to cope with having to perform a heterosexual act they by definition do not desire, and to make McKinnon's own admission, do not desire. And this, of course, is a typical pornographic fantasy scenario where women are pressured to have sex they do not want to have, only to realize they really love it. That's a male fantasy. In a lesbian specific context, it's the queer equivalent to all she needs is a good dick, which I'm sure we've all heard many times. In that scenario, the male has overcome the lesbian's rejection. How do we call a sexual scenario where the woman says no initially and the male overcomes her rejection? It's a rape. So these quotes, most of them have been removed from social media, maybe in an attempt to hide their obvious rapey nature, but luckily we have screenshots. However, it carries on. Articles and tweets keep on appearing to educate lesbians on how best to have sex with trans women and accept penises as female organs that we are told we should include in our sex lives. So a few quotes from there, very simple. Some lesbians have penises. Lesbian sex could include people who have vaginas, but also people who have penises. So the exclusive nature of lesbian sexuality is framed as problematic, posing a complex ethical dilemma. It's seen as mean to exclude a person based on their genitals. It's seen as bigoted to exclude entire group from one dating pool. Excluding trans people is framed as a form of racism. Lesbians are framed as a hateful group, lesbianism as a hate crime against trans women. So, where does this sexual pressure happen? When online is a great place to individually target lesbians who, as well as to promote the idea that lesbianism is hate speech. And I'll focus mainly on Twitter and dating apps, which have proven to be instrumental grounds for trans activists. So lesbian dating apps have become the playground for autogynophiliac male. So I'll show that to AGP. AGP is a fetish where a male is sexually aroused by the thought of himself as female. So there's not really any research on the cotton ceiling apart from the one I've done. And I couldn't find any research about the prevalence of male in lesbian dating apps, because officially we are not supposed to notice that they are there at all. All these that I'm showing you have been found on lesbian dating sites, yeah? In fact, we are often told that we cannot possibly know if a person is male or female just by looking at them. And in fact, we are also told that we probably had many crushes on trans women without knowing it. And somehow from a lesbian perspective, lesbians seem to know that lesbian dating apps are completely invaded by males. Some try to pass as women, some do not. Some call themselves lesbians, some call themselves queer, some call themselves men. Literally anything goes. But as you can see, it's absolutely impossible to tell which one is a lesbian or a woman or not, yeah? So what are males doing on lesbian dating apps and why are they there? Well, pornography gives you a bit of a clue. Males are completely obsessed with lesbian sex. The term lesbian was Pornhub most searched term in 2016, 2017, 2018. It came second in 2015 and third in 2019. This is Pornhub own research and own figures. And in the UK, I don't know what it's like in Germany, but in the UK, lesbians have been excluded from lesbian dating sites for stating that they were not interested in penises. So I wanted to show you this picture, and this is a moderator from a dating app for lesbian called Her. So this man and others like him, no doubt, not only are welcome to have profile on this lesbian dating site looking for lesbians, but in fact, he also works for this dating site. So he gets paid to indulge in his fetish. And if you look at his t-shirt, I think this is a clear summary of transgenderism manifesto. With no irony, that man proclaims, "Her world is yours," as he hands over profiles of women who love women to males who invade the platform. And here is the man's job description, I think, should include invade lesbian space, gaslight lesbians, disrespect lesbian sexual boundaries, silence lesbians, ban lesbian from lesbian spaces, and enable AGP men to prey on lesbians. But all this is all right because it's done under the guise of inclusivity and diversity. So it's cool, it's progressive, it's all right. And when lesbians have highlighted that, all this is a form of sexual coercion and pressure, that it's rapey, that sexual boundaries should be respected. Have we not heard recently, years of Me Too demonstrating that rape is bad? We're told no, that coercion is not happening. There is no pressure whatsoever. No one is forcing anyone to have sex they don't want to. And yet, this is how lesbians are treated online. So there's a lot of violent tweets that are sent to gender critical women, you might be aware. But here I've only selected a handful that were sexual violence targeted at lesbians by trans activists. And these threats are aimed at lesbians when lesbians talk about exclusive same-sex attraction. So here's one that is very clear. Transphobic cis lesbians should be required to gobble on some girl cock in re-education camp. It's quite clear, I think. And this one here, particularly violent, where one young lesbian is being threatened to be raped by a girl dick for not accepting a girl dick. She is 15. All this again happened online. So with all this going on online, I wanted to know more about lesbian experiences directly. And in 2019, I published a research on the cotton ceiling called Lesbian at Ground Zero, which you can see on the screen. The research has now been translated in German and is available on our website. The address is right at the bottom at getthealartuk.com. The research was an attempt to understand what were lesbian experiences when faced with trans women in their LGBT groups on dating sites in real life. The finding confirmed that there is a huge pressure in LGBT groups to accept without question the mantra that trans women are women. For lesbian, it means that defining lesbianism as same-sex attraction and excluding people who have penises is considered a form of hate speech and it's violently punished. So when lesbians exclude males sexually, there's a lot of name calling and demonizing. We are called TERF, we are called transphobe. This is commonplace. This constant pressure creates a culture of terror, leading to women policing each other in order to not appear to be a TERF to the rest of the group. This pressure is endemic. So as I've shown at the last 50% of lesbians that responded to my survey had been excluded from their group, and 60% reported being intimidated or receiving threats. You can see some of the threats here on the screen. This constant pressure is a form of coercion and leads lesbians to feeling pressured to accept men who identify as trans women as sexual partners. So in the yellow box, you can see some quotes that are from women who responded to the survey. So this one, for example, I thought I would be called a transphobe and that it would be wrong of me to turn down a trans woman who wanted to exchange nude pictures. And this one, I was told that homosexuality doesn't exist and I owe it to my trans sisters to unlearn my genital confusion so I can enjoy letting them penetrate me. Again, all these are direct quotes. I want to say that the harassment received by LFT members and LFT as a collective fits exactly the same pattern. Lesbians who responded to the survey also reported having been subjected to a wide range of sexual violence by men who call themselves trans women. Younger lesbians seem to be particularly vulnerable to that. Perpetrators have used queer theory mixed with guilt tripping to pressure, justify, or excuse sexual violence. The sexual violence ranged from coercion, online grooming, sexual harassment and assault, to rape by deception or with physical force. And it happened in public spaces, in clubs, in women's toilets, with unwanted sexual touching, or in rape scenarios and private setting when the lesbians were vulnerable, drunk, asleep, or unable to leave, or during dates when women withdrew consent and were then pressurized and raped. And I'm going to read you that quote in full here from a survivor. The man I went on a date with unknowingly was a mutual friend with people I knew. He threatened to out me as a TERF and risk my job if I refused to sleep with him. I was too young to argue and had been brainwashed by queer theory. So he was a woman, even if every fiber of my being was screaming throughout. So I agreed to go home with him. He used physical force when I changed my mind upon seeing his penis and raped me. So I wanted to read this in full because I think this story replicates perfectly McKinnon's Twitter exchange that I've just shown you a few slides before. So a portion of the women targeted in that particular way are very young, very often involved in the queer environment. The young, brave women detransitioners who are speaking out publicly, I'm thinking here of Max Robinson, who spoke, one of the first women who spoke about this a few years ago, or a woman going by the name of GNC Centric on YouTube on her channel, as well as many women who send us anonymous testimonies on the Lesbian Me Too website, speak about the link between queer environment, their own transition, grooming, BDSM, the blurring of sexuality, and the breaking of sexual boundaries. Young women who question their sexualities and are same-sex attracted nowadays don't call themselves lesbians. They usually identify as queer, non-binary, or trans. They would typically join a local, but more often online LGBT queer group. There are no lesbians in these groups. In fact, a lot of these groups are run by older males with various gender identities. In these groups, the gender non-conformity and same-sex attraction of these teenagers is seen as the sign that they are trans men, not lesbians. In these groups, young lesbians are introduced to queer theory. They are encouraged to transition. The idea of sex work or BDSM is normalized, even encouraged. Regardless of what you think of these, remember we are talking about groups run predominantly by adult male for teenagers, and a lot of which are female. So we know that a significant proportion of young women who transition are most likely to be same-sex attracted, in other words, lesbians. A high percentage of them have a history of mental health issues, self-harm, trauma. We also know there are links with autism. So we're talking here about a very, very vulnerable group of young women. These young teenagers are effectively groomed by older males with the help of queer theory. They internalize that they are not female. They internalize that men who identify as women are real lesbians, not them. They internalize that men who identify as trans women are more oppressed than they will ever be. And they internalize that real lesbians have penises and that they themselves should accept sex with people with penises. Young same-sex attracted female in the queer scene are targeted by much older males who identify as women. Many are in sexual relationship with them, and these men are very often into BDSM in one way or another, sometimes age play, sometimes incest play, these kind of things. And here, I'm saying this because we start to see that for a proportion of girls who transition within the queer community, there's a clear crossover between transitioning of young lesbians and the cotton sealing, and that these two issues are in fact not separate issues in many cases. There is a specific fetishization of young transitioned teenage lesbians. There is a specific porn category for FTM, where female who identify as trans are filmed in sexual acts with male. Some of these males are straight men, some identify as trans, some are even gay men. The level of sexual and emotional violence faced by these young lesbians is horrendous.
Angela,
this picture, and I'm sorry, it is not a very nice picture, it's the least triggering that I've found. I think everything is presented. You have the youth, childlike aspect of the girl, the transition, the double mastectomies, the scars, the self-harm, the femaleness, the sexualization and objectification, the BDSM, and the fetishization. So what is the political relevance of all this for lesbians? Well, when major LGBT organizations are supporting trans rights while simultaneously silencing lesbians, this is what they are enabling, and this is what they are supporting. They are supporting the harm of highly vulnerable group of girls by the medical profession. They are supporting the conversion therapy of young lesbians via transition and via the cotton sealing. And they are also supporting the grooming of vulnerable teenagers for pedophile male sexual gratification. And as they do this, they dare to call us, lesbians, detransitioners, cotton sealing survivors, whistleblowers, hateful, as we denounce the violence that is done to us. In 2021, it is lesbians who say that we are lesbian who have to go into hiding, have our event deplatformed, our funding withdrawn, our job threatened. It is us who are receiving death threats and rape threats, us who are called Nazis, us who are hounded, while perpetrators and their high-profile supporters are acclaimed as brave and stunning. In my mind, this is one of the biggest sexual scandals of our time. So since 2018, my sisters and I get the hell out, and many women around the world have been constantly agitating about this issue. Why are we not breaking through? Is it because no one cares about rape victims, or about teenage girls, or about dykes? The cotton sealing issue is forgotten, even within radical feminist circles, sometimes even in gender critical groups. Nobody wants to touch it. Why? Because talking about it means saying the obvious. A man who calls himself a lesbian is breaking lesbian sexual boundaries, and a man who breaks sexual boundaries is a potential rapist. As we know, we are not allowed to name men as perpetrators. There is even a bigger taboo into naming men who transition as perpetrators. So I'm asking you to think of who you are protecting and who you are silencing if you choose to remain silent on this issue. To finish, I want to just mention our latest project. It's called Lesbian Me Too. It's a project we set up at Get the Hell Out UK, and it's offering a space for lesbians to report their experience of sexual violence by men. It's creating a lesbian-only space where lesbians can express themselves freely and speak up. We include all stories of sexual violence committed by men, including those who call themselves women. We have made the website available in many languages, including in German. And we accept testimonies anonymously, so women do not have to reveal who they are or send email addresses. We take survivors' safety extremely seriously. This project is important because in cases of cotton sealing, for example, we've tried to demonstrate here that we are told repeatedly, it's a myth, it doesn't exist, it doesn't happen. The Lesbian Me Too campaign is a tool to demonstrate that these stories are real, that rape victims need to be heard, even if the male who raped them identify as a woman. With Lesbian Me Too, we hope to reach a stage where the evidence on the website is overwhelming and it cannot be denied anymore. I'm calling on all lesbians to use the website, share it in your network, send it to your friends, submit your own stories, make use of it in every possible way. Together we can make lesbian survivors visible, and together we can break the silencing of cotton sealing rape survivors. Finally, we are often told that all women need to do in this debate is to be kind, accepting, unquestioning. We are told to shut up and take it. And in contrast, what I believe we need as lesbians today are strong boundaries and a clear voice. Every time a lesbian or a group of lesbians speak about our experience, create a woman-only space, hold strong on her own sexual boundaries, we are helping a lesbian somewhere to do the same. I encourage all of you, as Andrea Dworkin once said, to remember, resist, and do not comply. Thank you very much.